Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Larochelle, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. It's November 22nd, 2023. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host. You can send us your questions and comments at questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can post them on the YouTube chat page. Well, Helga, things are moving very rapidly on various strategic fronts, with new developments on Netanyahu's war on Gaza, diplomatic initiatives aimed at calming down the hotspots, and the Schiller Institute's initiative to not just calm things down, but to move to a whole new strategic architecture. Let's begin with something which was just announced a couple of hours ago, that an agreement has been reached for a 4-day ceasefire in Gaza, beginning tomorrow, which will allow for the exchange of Israeli hostages taken by Hamas for Palestinians who have been imprisoned in Israel. This has been the focus of major international diplomacy. Questions are being raised by both sides as to whether the other can be trusted. What is your view of this, Helga, both of the ongoing diplomatic activity and what this means overall? Does this represent a potential significant change?
One would definitely hope so. I think there are many factors which came into play. One is the fact that there is an international outcry against what was generally perceived and characterized by many as genocide going on in the Gaza, of a dimension which, is mind-boggling and very, very impossible to continue to bear. So there were demonstrations in many countries, naturally the Islamic countries, who also in the form of the OIC is involved in a major diplomatic tour together with the Arab League, going to the 5 BRICS nations. They visited first China, then Russia, and then following that Great Britain and Paris. Then, naturally, the situation of Netanyahu in Israel is becoming, almost as untenable, because many people, including the relatives of the people who were the victims of October 7th, accuse Netanyahu that he is responsible for what happened. Then you had this long march of the relatives of the hostages, also demanding that Israel must act to free the hostages. So I think there came a lot of pressures on the situation, and one could only hope that this present pause, which hopefully will last, is going to be used to be extended beyond the 4 days. It was already said that for every additional 10 hostages, one more day, the pause would be prolonged. But obviously, this is not enough, and it is up to the United States primarily to make sure that this war ends, because that is the one force which Israel would have to recognize. So I think this is the time for all people who are really tortured by what happened to move and mobilize together with us and all the other peaceful efforts which are underway, that you have to put on a final definite solution in the form of China is pushing the International Peace Conference for the establishment of the 2-state solution of the conflict. But most important, there has to be a commitment by all forces involved to have peace through development, because the only way how there's any hope to settle this conflict and bring it to an end is to have a peace plan for the entire region, that is all of Southwest Asia, by mobilizing for the Oasis plan. This was a plan developed by my late husband, Helga Larochelle, already in 1975, which was the idea that you have to have massive production of fresh water, because all of these states are basically deserts for the most part, and that you have to have real industrial development, which now is possible due to the existence of the Belt and Road Initiative and the willingness of China to play a major role in the development of the region. And, 4 countries of the region are going to be parts of the BRICS at the 1st of January 24. That is Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and Iran. And then, sort of part of the region is Egypt, which is the bridge to Africa at the same time. So if there would be now a commitment to put an international development conference for the entire region on the table, maybe that would also provoke peaceful forces inside Israel to make sure that they become the dominant force in the country, so that there could be an end to this absolute horror show, which, I could say a lot more, but there are now many people speaking out about it. And I think, at this point, the only thing which counts is to bring the war to an end and bring development.
Well, you covered some of what was in the first couple of questions we received, but I'll ask them to you anyway, because they reflect the polarization that's out there. From someone in New York, the question was, what makes you think Hamas can be trusted to keep a ceasefire? And from Israel, why don't Biden and the American Congress recognize that the problem is Netanyahu and his alliance with the most radical extremist Zionist settlers? And this person referenced Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, members of the cabinet who both voted against the ceasefire exchange deal.
Well, I think the answer to the first question is that, the plight of the Palestinian people, I think is enough, and anybody who has any heart left will concede to this demand. And I can only say that if you don't put a credit for the future into the picture, you never will get to an end of this. And to the second question, I think I can only reflect on what Helga Larochelle used to say, namely that it is not Israel which determines the situation, but it is the strategic intention of the United States, which many times uses Israel as a hand grenade to put into a situation. And I think, therefore, the control over this is clearly inside the United States.
Now, there have been several questions that have come in regarding your activity and the Schiller Institute activity. Someone asked, what is the International Peace Coalition that we're involved in, and how can one get involved? And this is someone who is interested in the November 26th conference that's been set up for 11 a.m. Eastern Time, titled No More War Crimes, Development, Not Depopulation. So what is the IPC and how can people get involved?
Well, the IPC is the effort which we launched about almost 4 months ago, with the idea to unite all the different peace groups around the world, because there are many people. As a matter of fact, I have the distinct impression that it's the vast majority of people around the world who are sick and tired of being the victims in fighting wars for a small oligarchical elite, by sacrificing young men and young women in senseless wars, and that this whole idea in the 21st century that war can be settled, that conflicts can be settled with war, has to stop, because in the age of thermonuclear weapons, this is for sure outdated and must be stopped. So the IPC is the idea to unite the peace movement in the West. First of all, to unite them, because there the divide and conquer principle, unfortunately, is still relevant, and sometimes it takes just subtle ways, saying don't talk to these people, stay away from these people, so therefore, what should be a groundswell, a stream of opposition against the very idea of war is many times, a little demonstration here, a little action there. But we have to unite all of these efforts in the so-called North, and then combine the peace movement of the global North with the aspiration of the countries of the global south to have a just new world economic order. And I think one of the purposes of the IPC is to make both sides, the peace movement in the north and the developing countries in the south, recognize that their interest is absolutely identical and that both of their problems, the lack of development in the south and the lack of peace in the north, are caused by the same oligarchical principle, which clearly is in a phase of demise and does not like the idea that the new system is emerging primarily around the BRICS countries, but also many other organizations of the global south. So you can join that effort. That's most laudable. The next big conference will be on Sunday, where we will, on the one side, naturally discuss the options for a peace solution in Southwest Asia, but also emphatically make clear that if we don't get peace, then that what happened in Hiroshima, with the victims of the nuclear bombs being thrown there, is threatening the fate of the entire world. And since some of the war hawks had basically justified the way out of proportion reaction by Israel against Gaza, that this was legitimate because after all, the United States threw a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the firebombing of Dresden also flattened that city and caused 35,000 people to die in the flames at the time. And therefore, the over-proportionality of the Israeli response would be legitimate as well, which is outrageous that anybody who is human could say such a thing. But therefore, we will show the extraordinary documentary made by the daughter of one of the victims of Hiroshima, showing exactly what this meant, what the death in the nuclear catastrophe meant, so that people really see the connection that if we do not get the two wars under control, the Ukraine war and the war in Southwest Asia, this has the potential of developing into a global war, which by necessity would be a nuclear war, and that would mean the end of civilization. So this coming Sunday is a wake-up call. The author of the documentary, the Japanese woman who wrote the script, will be there, Dr. Akiko Hakima, I always pronounce it wrongly. She will be there also in the Q&A, and you can ask her any questions if you register in time. So please do that and join us on Sunday.
Well, we're talking with Helga Larochelle, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. This is our weekly dialogue, and you can send questions or comments to questions@schillerinstitute.org. You mentioned your late husband's Oasis plan. There is a LaRouche organization pamphlet available titled Peace Through Development for Palestine and Israel, the LaRouche Oasis Plan. People can contact us to get a copy of that. Now, Helga, we have a question that came in from one of our contacts in Mexico who asked, do you have a report on the BRICS Emergency Summit on Gaza that took place yesterday?
Yes, that was very important. It was naturally virtual, but it had the participation of President Putin, President Lula, Prime Minister Modi was represented by the Foreign Secretary Jaishankar from India, Ramaphosa from South Africa, and I think I have them now all. And they discussed basically an initiative really calling for an immediate settlement of the conflict in basic terms. And I think the fact that the BRICS are now taking responsibility, I think is very important, because if you take the BRICS and the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the Arab League, who both the latter two organizations made this tour to the BRICS countries, traveling through the different capitals, I think this is the kind of environment which gives hope that there may be a solution possible.
Now, we have a question that was sent in by Jeremiah, who is obviously trying to do some organizing on behalf of what we're doing. He said, how do you challenge people to get them to support a credit system to develop the future along the lines of the LaRouche Plan, and to get the West to join the BRICS, rather than remaining a subject of an imperialist nation?
Well, I think the question of accepting such a credit system may force itself on the agenda if people like it or not, because there is no question that we are sitting on a complete powder keg. The US managed right now to prolong the budget somehow, but that is a complete fiction, because the US is so over indebted, and any kind of disruption could explode this whole thing, as it is doing in Germany right now. I mean, in Germany, Germany is now in a comparable situation like it was the US before they reached a compromise on the budget, but much more unsolvable, really, because the Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe just ruled that it was forbidden for the coalition government to use the funds which were basically set aside as a special fund for the cost of the corona pandemic, to just use that money now to finance some of the transformation to a green economy. This is out. Now there is a hole in the budget of 60 billion euro, and basically panic has struck this coalition. The finance minister Lindner basically made a ruling that that there's a expense stop. So a lot of things, that there will be the money which was supposed to compensate every household for the heightened energy cost of about 300 euro. That is cut. So for a lot of people, that will mean they will have a hard time to finance their exorbitant energy bills. Many other programs will be just cut. And in general, it will be every area in the social programs except the military budget. And that will cause a lot of people to get really furious. And maybe we come to this question later on. But, I think that the need to accept the reorganization of an utterly bankrupt system will become apparent more and more, because if the military buildup is the only thing the governments are willing to pay, while all the basic necessities, infrastructures, welfare, health system, education, all of that is being cut, I think the willingness of people to demand a change will be rapidly increasing, and especially because you have now the new development bank headed by Dilma Rousseff. She is known to have fought for a new credit system ever since she was president. Now she's the head of the new development bank, and there are many efforts by the different BRICS countries, especially China and Russia, but also others, to develop a new currency, a new reserve currency, a new credit system. And while the West is suffering from all of these collapse consequences, the countries of the global south are moving in this other direction, and that will be visible more and more. So the reasonable thing would be to say, okay, we make a review of our business model. That's the other thing. It's so clear, all the efforts of the global north, of the United States, of NATO, of Europe, are failing. Look at all the wars which were fought. Vietnam was lost. Afghanistan was an utter failure. Iraq, failure. Assad is still there. Libya, failed state as a result of the NATO intervention. All of these policies were utter failures. The Ukraine situation is now coming soon. It will be so apparent that this war has been lost as well. and the only outcome is tremendous suffering of the Ukrainian people, naturally the Russian people, and all the others, who are suffering from the consequences, like the millions of refugees who have fled to neighbor countries. So why cannot the establishment of the global north, the United States, Germany, France, why can they not have the stature to get together and say, well, maybe we pursued a policy which did not function. Any firm which has bankruptcy threats hanging over their head would get together and, either the management can make a new business plan, put the business on a better perspective, or replace the management. The Western political elites seem to be absolutely incapable of making that simple step of correcting their policies, which is obviously based on completely wrong axioms. So that means that the gap between the people and their governments has never been so big like in the United States and in Europe. And I think, this is threatening to go into an explosion, because I can easily see that the coming winter and will be just worsening the whole situation. And we have to find more and more people who demand a new paradigm, because it should be clear that all of these things hang together, and that you cannot solve one problem after the next one by one, but you really have to correct the entire system if it is failing you in the way it is obvious.
Well, you just provoked a question from Germany where someone asks, with the Ukraine situation devolving as rapidly as it is, and with Germany pledging more money for Ukraine, and this budget crisis you just described, can the current coalition government in Germany survive?
One would hope not. Look, the situation in Ukraine is over. That is openly discussed in a lot of American columns, by politicians and so forth. And it's clear that the Ukraine war, the so-called counteroffensive, did not work. The new budget of the United States, which just passed, does not prolong the money to Ukraine. So the money from the United States will be significantly less. I think something like 30% less, or even, I'm not entirely sure, but some major reduction. And what is happening in Germany? Our defense minister, I don't know if he's our defense minister, he's a defense minister, all right. He just went for the, I think, third time to Kiev since he's in office, and he's promising more German aid, more German equipment, more German money. This Pistorius recently made a speech where he said that we have to make Germany war ready, kriegstüchtig. This caused a tremendous outcry among many people, because whenever Germany goes in the direction of militarism, there are some reasonable people who don't really find that so hot. So, what happens then? Then he went into a long interview on national TV explaining, it just means to make Germany ready to defend itself. Now, who is threatening to attack Germany? Well, if you look at the various think tanks and related outlets, like certain journalists and certain professors from various universities, they all of a sudden are talking about the need to anticipate the coming war with Russia. Now, I don't want to have that. They're talking about that the war with Russia will be inevitable in 6 years or in 10 years, because they argue that after the Ukraine war is over, Russia immediately will go into a rearmament to attack the next country, maybe in the Baltics, maybe Moldavia, maybe even some other countries in Europe, and that therefore war in Europe will become likely. And since Russia could be ready in 6 years, probably in 10 years, NATO has to be prepared to fight that war in 6 years. And therefore, the only area which is supposed to be built up is the military sector. Everything else is being cut. but there is supposed to be a military build-up and a militarization of the German society, increase of military production, more soldiers into the Bundeswehr, into the federal army, and a strengthening of the so-called resilience of the population. Therefore, everybody from, this is the proposal of one think tank, everybody from the age of 35 to 65 is supposed to put in 1 year of service. Not everybody at the front, but wherever somebody can fit and play a role. Now, this is the plan for the coming World War. And I think, we have to really wake up and say, we had after the Second World War in Germany, a very famous and very useful slogan, which was never again. And that meant never again to genocide, never again to war. And that war should never emanate from German soil again, ever. And I think we have to increase the peace movement. And I can only tell people this coming Saturday, there will be a hopefully big demonstration in Berlin. You should go there and participate in it. And we have to have a debate that this is the wrong way. We should absolutely not go in the direction of a militarization of Germany. And every person who knows somebody in Germany should contact them and tell them, are you out of your mind that you tolerate this? Because I think Germany urgently needs an intervention from the outside, because inside Germany, we are becoming more and more, a colony. As a matter of fact, I'm afraid we are already one. And we need these people to wake up, because there is an alternative. The alternative is that we work together with the global South, the global majority of mankind, and have a system where everybody can survive and not go in the direction of this insane militarization, which is in the worst traditions of Germany and the rest of the world.
Well, what you're describing is the power of the so-called military-industrial complex in its broader terms, the corporate cartels and so on, in most of the NATO countries and definitely in the United States. Which brings me to the next question, which is that today is the 60th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, who most people believe was targeted because of his resistance to the military-industrial complex plans in the United States on a variety of issues. Now, for those who haven't seen it yet, I devoted my daily update today to the memory of John F. Kennedy, and people can look at that. But the question that came in is, do you think that the assassination of John F. Kennedy and its cover-up is still preventing leading figures in U.S. politics from challenging the establishment?
I think so, because, it is like these terrorist murders, in a sense, and this was a terrorist attack, or the idea of political murders, apart from getting rid of somebody who is, in the way of the powers to be, always also has the intended core message to all other people: don't do likewise, or you could have a similar fate. As a matter of fact, my late husband, Helga Larochelle, used to say that, the big wound of the United States is not only the assassination of Kennedy, but the cover-up through the Warren Commission, because the inability of the American society to uncover the real story behind that murder, has led to a complete paradigm shift. I mean, I can only advise you, go to the website, I don't know if you mentioned it, Harley, either Harley's website, or you can go to YouTube and look at the peace speech and some other speeches of Kennedy, his speech in front of the United Nations, or the speech on education. And you will see that he had a completely different paradigm. He was a cultural optimist. He was for the economic transformation of the global South. He believed in the absolute ability of human creativity to solve any problem. He thought that you have to talk to your enemy. After all, he averted the Cuban Missile Crisis when the military advisors tried to convince him to solve the conflict militarily, which, given the fact that the Soviet missiles had nuclear warheads on them, could have led to a nuclear war, which people didn't know at the time. So Kennedy has so many aspects, which are in diametrical opposition to the policies of the US government today, that one can really see that the real reason why they assassinated him was to cause the paradigm shift in the direction of the present militaristic outlook of the military-industrial complex, what we see in action today. And, the parallel in Germany was the assassination of Alfred Herrhausen in the moment of the German pending unification on the 30th of November 89, a couple of days later in November, which was also not only aimed to eliminate Herrhausen as the head of Deutsche Bank, who had a very different policy than the banking system today, namely debt forgiveness for the developing countries and development programs like for Poland outside of the conditionalities of the IMF. And by eliminating him, they did not only eliminate that policy, but also it was a warning shot against all the people around Helmut Kohl to not use the momentum of the German unification to enforce real German sovereignty. And from that, we are suffering to the present day. So I think that any effort to, investigate the Kennedy murder and, correct that is probably as crucial to the survival of the United States like a similar effort would be in respect to Herrhausen for Germany.
Also, it would help to investigate the Nord Stream pipeline bombings. In closing, Helga, let me come back to the International Peace Coalition conference this coming Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. No more war crimes, development, not depopulation. And your assessment of the significance of people actually getting together and having these kinds of discussions.
Yes, I think that, I can only report it from myself, but also of some friends and colleagues I was talking with, that when you are right now in this political situation where it is very clear that an entire system is really collapsing, you have an unspeakable reaction to the failure of the Ukraine war by going in the direction of a military buildup. This has the danger of getting out of control to a larger war. Then you have the horrific situation in Southwest Asia, which is, it should get everybody upset to really act and try to change it. And most people, because they don't see governments in the West who seem to respond to all of this with reasonable policies, there is a tendency, at least in Germany, I don't know if it's in the United States or other countries like that, where people freeze, they get paralyzed. They see it and they say, oh, I don't know, I can't stand this anymore. I don't want to watch the news anymore. Rather than understanding that if you don't act right now, it may get worse. But if they make the step and get together on an event like this coming Sunday, where you will hear reasonable people from all around the world, and there is a forum to actually talk about it and talk about solutions, then people find back to their optimism and become human again. Because if you are freezing and paralyzed, you are really losing your essence, so to speak. So I can only advise you, please, we need you, we need every person on the planet to mobilize, because this is a test for our morality to survive, and the answer is not yet clear.
And let me just punctuate that with a quote from John F. Kennedy from an address he gave to newspaper publishers on April 27th, 1961. where he was attacking the idea of secrecy and censorship. And he concluded by saying, without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. So I would definitely second what President Kennedy said and what Helga just said about the importance of speaking out, not giving in to fear. And Helga, thanks for joining us today. And hopefully a lot of people watching today will be involved in the event on Sunday.
Yes, and bring your friends and colleagues.